York City. The yellow cabs, the indigenous wildlife, the scenic vistas, and of course, good people.
Yeah, it's good to be back. NYC and The Division. Name a better duo. Anyway,
Ubisoft reached out to me asking if I wanted to play episode 3 early. Knowing it took place in New York, I said sure. And then they told me about the top secret expansion they were working on. That came as a surprise. I had no idea they were working on an expansion that brings us back to New York City, only this time the open world is Lower Manhattan. It's called Warlords of New York, and I actually have some gameplay to show you guys in a minute. It feels like there's a lot of content coming out for The Division 2 in a short amount of time. In February, we're getting the free Episode 3, which adds new missions, new weapons, a new specialization, Flamethrower, and Coney Island. And then in March, they're dropping the new expansion, Warlords of New York. I've got a link down in the description below if you want to check out more details about Warlords. And again, I'm going to show you some gameplay of the new map in just a second.
regardless, that's not all that's coming in March. Then we're also getting Gear 2.0, which is overhauling the major RPG systems.
Now, I'm excited about New York City, but as someone who's sunk over 80 hours into the game,
This is what really piqued my interest as a returning player, because they're redesigning parts of the core experience. I'm very interested to see what they do with that. But before we get to Coney Island and the guns of Episode 3 and how it fulfills the dream of role-playing a cleaner, I'm going to share some key information about Warlords of New York while showing off open-world gameplay they sent me.
Warlords is set 8 months after the Dollar Flu events of the First Division, and it takes place in Lower Manhattan. So the open world is a new section of New York City that we haven't been to before. Again, I haven't played it, so I can't speak for how all this translates to gameplay, but visually it's stunning. An odd wave of nostalgia washed over me when I saw the elevated train. It's crazy how iconic New York City still is for the Division years later, and a sequel later. Even with the snow gone, it's striking just how different the maps of DC and New York are. New York City is almost like its own character in and of itself, and they've really outdone themselves designing this map. I especially like the city blocks that are flooded with just a few inches of water. They told me that a hurricane devastated Lower Manhattan shortly before the events of Warlords, and some areas are more flooded than others, and the destruction by the hurricane is supposed to have led to some interesting set pieces. Which I guess is how it looks terrible only 8 months after the Dollar Flu. I mean, it's pretty apocalyptic looking, and I actually really like that aesthetic. The best way I can describe it is it looks to me like concept art that I would see for a game, but wish that the concept art had been used in the game, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I love it, but I'm really interested to see what other people think because we're finally back in New York City, but it's not snowing this time. Personally, I actually think this may be the best looking Division map yet, or at least every bit as good as snowy New York, just a different season.
Check out the detail of these insects. I don't know how many people noticed the really shockingly good bees in DC. Those are some good looking bees, but the fact that they made a flying animated 3D model for the wasps is just too cool. You gotta love those details, man. To sum it up before we go to Coney Island, the expansion's got new missions, side missions, gear, weapons, skills, and a storyline involving the rogue agent Keener. But first, you have to get through his close guard of rogue agents standing in the way. Agents will need to uncover each of these rogue agents' locations as they embark on an epic manhunt across the transformed Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan is comprised of 4 playable areas: 2 bridges, Civic Center, Battery Park, and the Financial District. I asked Ubisoft if I could interview one of the developers about Warlords of New York, and they agreed, and I did, but I'll have to get to that in another video. If you guys want some more information on Warlords, I've got a link down in the description below. Moving on to Episode 3, our free content coming in February acts as a prologue to Warlords of New York.
Your DC agent is hauled in by boat to Coney Island, where the Black Tusk is deeply entrenched. You'll have to weed your way through go-kart tracks, baseball fields, and haunted houses to get a foothold. And it turns out Keener is pulling a fistful of dollars. Or, if you're a little more classic, he's pulling a Yojimbo, which was kind of gratifying considering what the Black Tusk pulled in DC. Anyway, some old friends return to Coney Island. Aha, the cleaners. It's good to see them again. It was actually pretty cool fighting these guys again, and the detail that they packed into Coney Island was incredible.
Serious trauma detected.
You fought through go-kart tracks, boardwalks, arcades that were packed with references to other Ubisoft games, and when you shot the screens, they actually had a pretty realistic looking panel damage. And then you had carnival games.
Oh, no way. That's found the best thing ever.
Funhouse areas, a baseball stadium. My favorite section was the haunted house. They stuffed all the haunted house tropes in they could. You got dummies on pulleys, fog machines, animatronics. I don't know who would still power a Coney Island haunted house 8 months into an American apocalypse, but it's a delightful mission nevertheless. As for content, there's 2 main missions, 2 classified missions for the pass holders, and a new specialization. They've also added some new gear and loot within the episode, but I had my eye on the 3 new weapons and especially the exotic. I'm not going to get super deep into the stats of the weapons or the minutia, because who knows what could change when Gear 2.0 rolls out, but I played for a couple of hours with all 4, and the Honey Badger is solid. It's fun. I found the handling to be enjoyable, but the G28 stood out. It was a pleasure to use, especially dinging off headshots and chipping weak points. Now, I'm probably missing something here, but I didn't love the UIC Mod 2. I can't think of any reason I would use it over the new G28. It kind of feels like a 22 in comparison. The G28 is a slugger. A certified slugger. I feel like the UIC Mod 2 could use a little buff. But again, maybe I missed something, I don't know. Like I said, I wasn't going to get into the minutia with Gear 2.0 around the corner. Now, the exotic of Episode 3 is the Chameleon, and it's a highlight. This gun is just too much damn fun. It's a 308 Vector, which is already a hell of a concept. But what makes this such a muse are the talents. Get 30 headshots for a plus 20% critical chance and a plus 50% critical damage for 45 seconds. 60 body shots for plus 100% weapon damage for 45 seconds. And 30 leg shots for plus 150% reload speed for 45 seconds. That's just insane. The shot requirements may sound like a lot, but with the fire rate, come on, it's a piece of cake. Initially, when I was going over the stats, I wasn't sure if this was going to be a gun for me because the stats, like the base damage, doesn't look like all that much. But the talents are great. The 3 talent factors are represented by these hexagons. So you see them fill up as you get the shots. Once a hexagon is filled, it turns gray for 45 seconds, and your modifier is active until it's drained. So you can just wash, rinse, and repeat. There's no cooldown. You can roll over as fast as you can get the shots, and the meters only wipe when you switch weapons. I found myself treating the talent like a minigame. When I could line them all up at once, enemies would melt faster than ice cream at a ballpark. It felt pretty damn viable, but it was a lot of fun, and that's what mattered the most to me. It's just I was having a blast using it, so I couldn't put it down. Overall, I really liked 3 out of the 4 weapons, and it was good to be back in NYC again. Although I definitely could have spent more time there because the level design was great. If you're anything like me, you always wanted to roleplay a cleaner. And now that dream can be realized. Firewall gives you a flamethrower, a cluster grenade, and a shield that can be used with the flamethrower. also a shotgun that can buff your fire damage. The flamethrower is super fun. Setting stuff on fire always is, but I think it could use a buff. I'm assuming this specialization was designed with Gear 2.0 in mind, so maybe I should wait and see. With the right group, I can see this having a great place. Treat the flamethrower as like a modifier sprayer. If you're running with a team of firewalls and pyromaniac guns, that could be a really solid composition. Plus, there's some pretty good stuff here in the spec tree. There's a lot that can be stacked with fire damage. In addition, your allies can get damage buffs to enemies that are within the cone of your shield, and they can get defense buffs if they're behind your shield. So if you're lighting up enemies with your flamethrower at a close range, couple of enemies within that cone on fire, your teammates behind you have a damage buff and pyromaniac guns, that could work out pretty well. I like the idea of a firewall team just kitted out to maximize fire damage, but I do think that a buff may be in order. I don't know, maybe they're already thinking about that. That being said, it's still a flamethrower, and that's hot.
Anybody order fried sauerkraut?
Even though I learned about some of this news early, it wasn't any less surprising to me. I was not expecting that they were working on a New York expansion for the Division 2, and they announced Gear 2.0 like a couple weeks ago. I hadn't heard about it. I'm not sure how because I do follow the subreddit. Regardless, I really enjoyed the 80 hours, over 80 hours I put into the Division 2, and I hope Warlords of New York is awesome. The map is pure eye candy, so I've got my fingers crossed that the layout benefits gameplay. But Gear 2.0 is where my respect really goes out to the developers, because it sounds like they're answering what the community's been asking for. And with all these overhauls, it almost feels like we're getting a new game with how many aspects these changes are going to touch. Even without the New York content, Gear 2.0 would be enough for me to return just to see how the new changes feel. I don't know. I like a good comeback.
Don't call it a comeback.
If you're curious about anything regarding overhauls or Warlords of New York, I encourage you to leave a comment below with any questions you may have. Because if I have an opportunity to ask more questions, I might be able to get some answers. Anyway, I'm hopeful. It looks good. I want to try it all out. I should have a video on the expansion releasing closer to March 3rd. And if you want to check out the expansion yourself, I've got a link to it in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys, and thanks again to Ubisoft for sponsoring this video and letting me get a hold of this content early. As always, stay frosty.